The Montecito Reckoning, Inside Harry and Meghan's Financial Crisis. So you've probably heard the whispers, right? That underlying tension that nobody really wants to talk about publicly, but everyone's discussing at dinner parties and in group chats. Well, I'm about to lay out exactly what's been happening behind those Montecito gates. And trust me, it's way more complicated and frankly more fascinating than the tabloid headlines suggest. This isn't just gossip. This is a story about borrowed dreams, broken promises, and what happens when the narrative people built for themselves collides with actual financial reality. Stick around because this gets really interesting, like the kind of interesting that makes you text your friends immediately after watching. Let me take you back to 2020 for a second. You remember that moment, right? When Harry and Meghan basically announced they were stepping back from royal duties. Everyone was shocked. The palace was shocked. The media went absolutely mental. And suddenly, there were these two figures, this young couple who had everything, the titles, the access, the resources, and they just walked away. They said they needed freedom. They said they needed to build their own life. They said they were being stifled by the institution. And a lot of people actually got it. A lot of people sympathized. They seemed like they were breaking free from something oppressive and out of touch. But here's where the story gets really interesting, and this is where most people miss the actual narrative. They didn't just walk away and figure it out. That's not what happened. What actually happened was that Tyler Perry, yes, that Tyler Perry, the entertainment mogul, the producer, the billionaire, basically opened his doors. He offered them access to his Beverly Hills property. He provided security. He gave them a safe place to land while they figured out their next move. And at the time, everyone was like, oh, how generous, how kind. Tyler Perry is such a good guy. And maybe he was, maybe he still is. But here's the thing nobody really talks about. That generosity apparently came with a price tag that's now become very relevant to understand. Now, I want to be careful here because we're dealing with allegations and rumors, but these aren't just some random conspiracy theories floating around on the internet. These are claims coming from credible Hollywood insiders, people who have a history of being accurate about these kinds of behind-the-scenes financial arrangements. And the story goes like this. Tyler Perry didn't just let them stay. He actually loaned them money, a significant amount of money. We're talking millions of dollars, money that allegedly helped them with the down payment on their Montecito mansion. You know, that $14 million estate that's supposed to be their forever home and their symbol of independence. Think about that for a second. Think about what that means. If they needed a loan, a substantial loan to buy the house that's supposed to represent their financial independence and their ability to make it on their own, what does that tell us about their actual financial position at that moment? It tells us they weren't as financially secure as they were publicly claiming to be. And that's a huge contradiction to the story they've been telling. They positioned themselves as people who didn't need the royal family's money, who were going to build their own empire through smart business deals and hard work. But if they needed millions borrowed from Tyler Perry to buy their house, well, that kind of undermines that narrative, doesn't it? Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. The arrangement, according to these sources, wasn't formal. There were no public contracts. There were no press releases. It was apparently a handshake deal between friends, which on the surface sounds kind of nice and intimate, right? But in practice, handshake deals between friends are exactly the kind of arrangements that go sideways because there's no clarity, there's no documentation, there's no specific repayment schedule that's ironclad. And when things get tight, and they apparently got very tight, those informal arrangements become sources of serious tension. So let's fast forward a bit. We're talking about the period starting around 2021, 2022, where they're supposed to be launching their empire. They sign this Netflix deal, everyone's excited. They sign a Spotify deal. There's all this momentum. The media is treating them like they're building this amazing media empire that's going to rival traditional studios. But here's what actually happened with those deals, and this is crucial. They underperformed significantly. The Netflix content started strong, got decent initial viewership numbers, and then it dropped. Viewership fell off a cliff. The documentary about them came out and people watched it, but the follow-up projects, not nearly as compelling to audiences as they'd hoped. The Spotify podcast, same thing. Initial interest, then a significant decline. People called them grifters. They were getting called out for not delivering on what people expected from them. And meanwhile, what about their foundation, Archewell? Well, if you actually look at the financial records, and I mean really look at them, not just accept the press releases, you start to see some pretty concerning patterns. Expenses were ballooning past $5 million annually. Donations were dropping to around $2 million. They had to make staff cuts. There were delinquency notices. The IRS was sniffing around. Now, again, these are documented things. This isn't me speculating. This is actual public record stuff that you can find if you dig a little. So we've got a situation where the streaming deals aren't performing like they promised, the foundation is struggling financially, and they've got this massive mortgage on a $14 million mansion. Oh, and they also have to pay for round-the-clock security, and we're talking serious security, the kind that costs hundreds of thousands a year, sometimes more. Property taxes in California are brutal, especially on a place like that. And they still need to maintain their lifestyle because, well, they're not exactly the type to downsize and move into something modest. Here's the thing that really matters, though. When you leave the royal family, you don't get a safety net. There's no Duchy of Cornwall money flowing in like there is for legitimate royals. There's no palace security budget. There's no emergency bailout fund. King Charles basically shut the top off. Prince William closed ranks. Any sympathy or institutional support that might have existed, gone. They burned those bridges and burned them hard. The Oprah interview, the whole scorched earth approach, the spare book where Harry basically aired out all the family dirty laundry, you don't come back from that and expect financial help from the institution you just publicly demolished.
So by 2023, 2024, Harry and Meghan are genuinely on their own. There's no palace to call. There's no discreet help. Nobody in the royal family is going to quietly assist them. And increasingly, nobody in Hollywood is either. The perception has shifted. They're not these rebels anymore. They're seen as entitled people who wanted to have it both ways. The prestige of being royal without the restrictions, plus the freedom and money of being independent entrepreneurs. And when the independence doesn't actually pay out, people lose interest. They lose sympathy. They just lose interest. So when Tyler Perry starts demanding repayment on that loan, and the reports are that this is happening, that he's basically issued an ultimatum, this becomes a really big deal. Because where else do they go? Their streaming income isn't there, the foundation is struggling, the book deals have pretty much dried up, their social media engagement has plummeted, nobody wants to hire them for major projects, so where's the money supposed to come from? And here's what makes this legally significant. If Tyler Perry actually takes them to court, and threatening that is apparently part of the negotiation right now, it opens up something called discovery. That's the legal process where both sides have to provide all their relevant documents, bank records, all the loan agreements, emails, text messages, tax returns, everything. And if one private loan gets exposed in discovery, guess what? All the others do too. Every handshake deal, every private arrangement, every temporary financial fix, it all comes out. Suddenly, it's not just Tyler Perry's loan, it's every other alleged lender wondering if they're going to be dragged into this. Every other financial arrangement they've made with anyone comes into question. That Montecito house becomes evidence, it becomes collateral, it becomes a $14 million question mark hanging over everything. And the thing is, when you're facing potential court action and discovery, your lawyers aren't going to let you just deny everything or come out with some clever PR statement. They're going to advise you to stay silent, because anything you say publicly can and will be used against you in court. So there's been silence, no denial, no clear statement, no documentation released to address this. And in financial disputes, silence isn't confidence, it's calculation. It's a sign that people are scrambling, consulting lawyers, reviewing what assets they actually have if things really go sideways. If you've been paying attention to the news around this, you've probably noticed that both Harry and Meghan have been very quiet on social media. Their charitable activities have been less visible. They're not doing big public events like they used to. And according to multiple sources I've seen, that's not accidental. They're in preservation mode. Apparently, they're reviewing everything, their jewelry, their inheritances, potential asset sales, residuals from old work, anything with liquid value. When cash flow is tight and court is potentially looming, liquidity becomes survival. And here's what's really fascinating from a Hollywood perspective. The entire entertainment industry is watching this, because if Tyler Perry's willing to go public with this, if he's willing to threaten court action, then all the other alleged private lenders are watching too. Nobody wants to be the person sitting quietly while everyone else is at least getting their situation into the open. So what you typically see in these situations is this cascade effect. One person breaks the silence, and suddenly everyone starts counting their chips and demanding repayment or threatening their own legal action. That's how financial avalanches start. Think about the timeline of Tyler Perry putting his Montecito mansion on the market. That's not coincidental. That's a strategic move. That's a signal. That's him basically saying, I'm liquidating assets. I'm serious about this. It's a pressure move. It's a way of showing that this isn't just talk. And reports suggest that Harry and Meghan understood the message loud and clear. Now, let's talk about something else that's really important here, the foundation situation. Because Archewell isn't just some side project. It's supposed to be their legacy. It's supposed to be their way of showing they care about the world beyond themselves. But if the foundation's financial records are showing what insiders are alleging, blurred lines between personal lifestyle costs and foundation expenses, property usage that's ambiguous, that becomes a serious problem, because the IRS doesn't play around with that stuff. When auditors are circling and delinquency notices are being issued, people get nervous. When accounts freeze, lenders panic. That's not speculation. That's just how financial institutions work. So we've got this perfect storm. Streaming revenue underperformed. The foundation is struggling. Private lenders are waiting. Silence is growing louder. And that's exactly the moment when someone like Tyler Perry speaks up. It's not random. It's timing. It's recognizing that the moment for collection is now, because the pressure is mounting from multiple directions. Look, I want to give you some perspective here, because I think it's important. I'm not saying this is necessarily a bad thing. I'm not here to pile on or be gleeful about someone's struggles, but I do think it's important to understand the reality of what's actually happening versus the narrative that's been presented to us. And the narrative that's been presented to us for the last few years is that Harry and Meghan are these brilliant entrepreneurs who are changing the media landscape. They're building this incredible empire. They're independent. They're free. They don't need anyone or anything. They're just doing their thing and changing the world. But the reality appears to be quite different. The reality is that their empire hasn't been as successful as they claimed or as the initial press coverage suggested. The reality is that they needed financial help from others to achieve what they've achieved. The reality is that they're facing pressure from multiple directions, underperforming ventures, financial obligations, and apparently some legal tension with people who have been helping them. That's not the narrative they've been selling. And when reality and narrative diverge this sharply, people notice, people talk about it, and most importantly, people lose trust. Here's what I think is really significant about this whole situation, and I want to make sure you understand this. Harry and Meghan built their brand on authenticity, on being real, on not playing the game, on being honest about their struggles and their journey. But if it turns out that they've been misleading people about their financial independence, about their success, about how self-made their empire actually is, that's a massive credibility hit. Because the one thing they had that was supposed to differentiate them from traditional celebrities and royals was this authenticity, this honesty, this sense that they were being real with people. If that turns out to be part of a carefully constructed narrative designed to make them look better than they actually are, then what do people trust about anything they say? And that's where the real damage is. It's not about the money. It's about the betrayal of the implicit contract they made with their audience. They said, we're going to be real. We're going to be honest. You can trust us. And now there are questions about whether that was ever actually true. Now, I should mention that if you're curious about this stuff, and I'm guessing if you're still watching, you are, you should probably subscribe, because I'm going to be covering this story as it develops, because trust me, this is not over. This is just the beginning. The legal processes around this are going to take time. There could be settlements, there could be court cases, there could be asset sales. There's going to be a lot of interesting developments, and I'm going to be keeping you updated on all of it. So definitely hit that subscribe button, because you don't want to miss what happens next. Also, if you have thoughts about this, and I'm sure you do, drop a comment below. Like, I want to know what you think.
Do you think they're going to find a way out of this? Do you think they'll have to sell the mansion? Do you think there's going to be actual court action? What's your take on the whole situation? I read a lot of the comments, and I genuinely engage with them, so let me know what you're thinking.
But let me continue here, because there's another layer to this that I think is really important to understand. We've been talking about the financial stuff, right? The loans, the underperforming deals, the foundation struggles. But there's also a psychological component to this that's worth examining. Because when you make a huge, very public decision like Harry and Meghan did, leaving the royal family, saying you're going to build your own empire, being very vocal about your independence, there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. There's an expectation, there's a standard you've set for yourself. And when you don't meet that standard, the fall is much harder. Think about it from a business perspective. If you're some random entrepreneur who launches a company and it doesn't do as well as you hoped, okay, that's business. You learn, you adapt, you move on. But if you're Harry and Meghan and you've spent the last few years telling everyone that you're building this incredible media empire and changing the world, and then it turns out the numbers aren't there, that's not just a business setback. That's a failure in the court of public opinion. That's a failure that's very visible and very public and very permanent on the internet. And I think that's actually part of why this situation with Tyler Perry has become so significant, because it's not just a financial problem, it's symbolic. It's a symbol of the disconnect between the narrative and the reality. It's proof, in a very concrete way, that things aren't what they seemed. And once that proof is out there, it's hard to put it back in the box. People are going to remember this. They're going to think about this when they see Harry and Meghan's name. They're going to wonder. And that wondering is corrosive to a personal brand built on trust and authenticity. Here's something else that I think is worth considering: the power dynamics in this situation. Tyler Perry is significantly more powerful than Harry and Meghan. He's been in the entertainment industry longer. He has more financial resources. He has established relationships with studios, networks, production companies. Harry and Meghan kind of parachuted into the entertainment world and expected to immediately compete at the highest level. But the reality is that they don't have the experience or the established relationships that someone like Tyler Perry has. And when you borrow money from someone who's significantly more powerful than you, and then you can't repay it, you're in a very vulnerable position. That's not just about money, that's about leverage. That's about someone having significant power over your future. And that's a very uncomfortable position to be in, especially when that person has the resources and the willingness to pursue legal action if necessary. I also think it's worth thinking about what this situation reveals about the circles they're in. Like, think about who they would have borrowed money from. It wouldn't be just some random banker. It would be someone they trusted, someone they had a relationship with, someone who was part of their world. Tyler Perry apparently filled that role. He was the benefactor. He was the one helping them out. He was the one who had their back when they needed it. But now that person is apparently on the other side of a financial dispute. That says something about the fragility of those relationships. That says something about how quickly friendships and business relationships can deteriorate when money gets involved. And speaking of money getting involved, let's talk about the broader implications of this for their brand and their business ventures. Because the streaming landscape has changed a lot since 2020, 2021. Back then, streaming services were desperate for content. They were throwing money at anyone who had a brand or a story to tell. But as the markets matured, quality matters, numbers matter, viewership retention matters. And by those metrics, Harry and Meghan's content hasn't delivered. The Netflix documentaries had initial interest, but faded. The Spotify podcast never really took off in a major way. The other projects they were supposed to be working on have either been quietly shelved or significantly delayed. So as the streaming services have gotten more selective and more focused on profitability, Harry and Meghan have found themselves with fewer opportunities. The doors that were open to them a few years ago are starting to close, and that means less income, less visibility, less relevance. And when that happens, loans that were meant to be repaid from future earnings start to look a lot more like permanent obligations. Because if the future earnings don't materialize, what then? This is why so many insiders are talking about asset sales.
Because if the income streams have dried up and the debts are piling up, the only way forward is to liquidate assets. Sell jewelry, sell inheritances, maybe even sell the mansion if it really comes down to it. And can you imagine what it would do to their brand if they had to sell the Montecito mansion? The whole point of the mansion was that it was their sanctuary. It was their symbol of freedom. It was the physical representation of their independence. If they had to sell it because they couldn't repay loans they took to buy it, that's a pretty devastating public statement about the reality of their situation. Now, I want to address something that I think is important. Some people, when they hear about this kind of financial trouble, they think, well, they're still rich. They're still Harry and Meghan. They'll be fine. And sure, they're not going to be homeless. They're not going to be destitute. But that's not really the point. The point is that they went from being in a position where they claimed complete financial independence and the ability to fund their own ventures, to being in a position where they're struggling to meet their obligations. That's a significant decline from where they positioned themselves. And in celebrity culture and in business, that kind of decline matters. People who were interested in them because they seemed to have it all figured out and were on this upward trajectory lose interest when it becomes clear that the trajectory was actually a mirage. People who were invested in the brand because they believed in the vision feel disappointed when the vision doesn't materialize. And that disappointment spreads. It becomes part of the conversation about Harry and Meghan. It becomes part of their legacy. The other thing that's worth considering is the long-term damage to their relationships. When you borrow money from someone and then can't repay it, it's not a minor thing. It's significant. It damages trust. It creates resentment. Even if Harry and Meghan eventually do find a way to repay Tyler Perry, whether that's through asset sales or new income streams or some kind of settlement, the relationship is changed. Tyler Perry won't ever look at them the same way. They won't ever look at him the same way. And in the entertainment industry, relationships are everything. When you damage a relationship with someone as powerful and as well-connected as Tyler Perry, that ripples outward. Other industry people hear about it. Other people become more cautious about working with you. Your reputation takes a hit. So really, the cost of this situation isn't just the money. It's the damage to their professional relationships. It's the damage to their credibility. It's the shift in how people perceive them and think about them. And that's not something they can recover from quickly. That's going to take years. I should note here that like this video if you're finding this interesting and if you want to see more analysis of stories like this. Because the algorithms work in mysterious ways and they need to know that people are engaged with content before they'll push it out to more people. So if you're enjoying this, hit that like button. It genuinely helps me continue making content like this and keeps the channel growing. And here's something else that people don't really talk about much but is pretty significant: the psychological toll of all this. Because we're talking about people who are used to a certain level of respect and deference. They're used to people saying yes to them. They're used to getting what they want. And now, suddenly, they're in a situation where they're being pushed, where someone is demanding something from them, where they don't have all the power in the situation. That's got to be incredibly uncomfortable. That's got to be adding stress to their lives and their relationship. And we know, based on various reports, that their relationship has been stressed. They've spent more time apart. There have been rumors about tension. Nothing official, but the whispers are there. And when you add financial pressure and legal risk on top of relationship tension, you've got a really difficult situation. You've got people who are struggling.